Welcome to another edition of your program, Decryptage on Africa 24 English. Africa could do better, but the infrastructure deficit remains an obstacle to better economic growth. The transport, energy and water services have experienced a rise in the African continent. According to the African Development Bank, this deficit is mainly due to insufficient funding. Africa's infrastructure financing needs will reach $170 billion per year by 2025. With solutions to mobilize more funds, Mr. Sanjeev Gupta, Executive Director of Financial Services at the Africa Finance Corporation, shares his vision on this critical issue. Mr. Gupta, welcome to Africa 24 English.
Thank you. It's a privilege, and thank you for inviting me.
How can gatherings like the AFC Infrastructure Solutions Summit help to reduce the infrastructure deficit that the African continent is experiencing?
So, the infrastructure deficit on the continent is so huge, and the need to create projects that are bankable and therefore attractive to investors can be so daunting that it requires collaboration. It requires governments, private sector, multilateral banks like ourselves, commercial banks, foreign governments, foreign capital to work together. So a summit like this really brings all these people together. It allows us to share our respective successes and failures, helps us to get to know each other well, and at the end of the day creates that spirit of collaboration, which is what we need.
The EFDB indicates that Africa is currently facing an infrastructure financing gap of between $68 billion and $108 billion per year. How can more funds be mobilized to meet this challenge?
Yeah, it's a particular problem where the need for funding in Africa is a multiple of the funding that is currently available. But ironically and sadly, when you talk to investors who do have money to deploy on the continent, they quite often mention the fact that project preparation and project development is not at the mark that allows them to come in and be comfortable. So I think to address the deficit, it is not just bringing more money, but it is also about working with governments, with the private sector, to develop projects that are bankable. Because once you create that bankability, once you de-risk some of the projects, then in our experience we have found that capital is quite forthcoming, quite available.
One of the challenges to be met for the development of infrastructure in Africa lies in the preservation of the ecosystems. Despite the numerous efforts made by governments, the infrastructure deficit still remains high. In your opinion, what is the level of infrastructure development on the continent as of today, and what possible solutions do you recommend to redress the situation?
So, Africa still today largely, in most parts of Africa, is still what I call a resource extraction economy, where oil, gas, metals, minerals, food products, agri-products are produced or extracted and exported without any value add processing or manufacturing taking place. So to us, remember, infrastructure is important, but infrastructure has to serve a need, right? So on one hand, you need infrastructure to help business to grow, but then you need business to support the infrastructure that you build, which is why the approach that we've taken is more like a circular approach, where we don't want to just simply invest in a mine or in a power project or in a road project or in a port. We want to see it as part of an overall ecosystem, that if there is a mine, what is the mine producing? How can we bring processing and manufacturing of the mining product within the continent itself? That then automatically creates an energy industry. That then needs logistics support, port. So you can then build a whole ecosystem around it with the ultimate objective of adding more value to your exports, and in the process also create jobs. And by default, infrastructure then has a steady demand, if you see where I'm coming from.
concerning the $2 billion loan facility designed by AFC to boost trade across Africa. Which sectors and regions are the priorities? Why? And what is the application process?
So the application process is very simple. It's an online process. We expect to process people's applications and approve within sort of 7 to 10 days turnaround, because we want to make it efficient. The objective of this facility is simple. As you probably heard, that over the last 2-3 years, the pandemic, then the recent war, then the general volatility in global capital markets has meant that funding for Africa, which was always a challenge, has dried up even more or has become probably more expensive. And particularly when it comes to normal short-term working capital trade financing, which is the domain of the commercial banks and the local banks, they need access to dollar funding, euro funding, and they're having difficulty accessing it. So this facility is designed to principally boost, if you like, the ability of Africa's own banking system to be able to provide working capital and trade finance support to their end clients. So this facility is not about supporting clients directly, but through the existing banking system, so that it strengthens a nation's banking. And as you know, when a nation's banking system is strong, it has many other positive consequences.
What is your vision for boosting trade in Africa?
So I think you might have heard, or maybe you didn't, in one of the sessions we were discussing that, the Common Free Trade Agreement is a very important step. But after the Common Free Trade Agreement is done, it still requires a couple of things. One is it needs connectivity within Africa. So if you're going to produce something in country A, it still needs to go to country B in an efficient way. So for that, infrastructure has to be built. So that's a role that we play. The other is that for Africa to trade within itself, it has to start producing things that each one needs, right? So for example, if you're going to both produce cocoa, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, you're not going to buy cocoa from each other. But somewhere within that cocoa producing region, if you can create a production of chocolates itself, then that is a product that the rest of Africa needs. Because otherwise, the rest of Africa is not going to come to you and buy cocoa. They're going to go and still buy the chocolates from Switzerland, right? So that's why our approach is build infrastructure that helps business, but also help primary products to become value-added processing hubs, so that the end product is what everybody needs. Because at the end of the day, one African country is not going to buy primary product from another country. That's not going to happen.
Digital infrastructure is a major prerequisite for the economic growth of the continent. What are the opportunities offered by the digital segment, and how can states improve their connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, digital is seen as a big leveler when we see the revolution and the impact that the mobile phone industry had on Africa, and how it allowed Africa to take a quantum leap in terms of its communication. You can clearly see that technology has a big role to play. And technology is not just something about suddenly making a gadget that works better. It's also about making use of technology so that we can manage transparency better, we can manage process better, we can manage pricing arbitrage type policies better. I'll give you an example. So today, if you can create technology that allows you to track a product that has been farmed in a particular village and ultimately is being exported to a particular market in Europe through blockchain technology, you can show that that product has gone through fair processes, it has met the general goals of the UN around gender diversity, child labor. You can then show that the power sources that's been used has been climate friendly power sources. All of that then allows you to show that Africa's produce meets the larger agenda about what sustainable development goals are all about. So technology has obviously got a lot of role to play, and I think where it needs to start is in data centers, in creating the environment for technology to thrive. We need to improve our bandwidth, we need to improve our satellite coverages, etc., etc.
The regional approach is advocated for infrastructure development in Africa. How can regional communities better organize themselves in this light?
I think the first thing regional countries in a region must try and do is to not compete with each other on basics. So I'll give you an example again. So in East Africa today, every country that I travel to is trying to build a massive airport to act as the hub. And I think that's inefficient. I think countries should get together and say we will have one hub, right? Similarly with ports, I mean, Africa is blessed with a coastline, which theoretically means that almost every country along the coastlines can build their own port and own logistics hub. But again, that can be inefficient unless it's structured in an organized way. Same with power. I mean, a lot of countries are individually small. So if you're going to build mega power stations, it makes sense to have power sharing pools and power sharing agreements with your neighbors. Because at the end of the day, resources being limited, each country's own domestic demand being still small, it doesn't make sense for countries in the same region to compete for the same goods and services. It makes more sense to collaborate.
The Africa Finance Corporation, through this meeting, celebrates 15 years of existence, working on infrastructure financing. How do you perceive the impact of its presence on the continent, and how can AFC be even more efficient in its missions?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's no end to growing, and we need to grow more. I mean, today we are a $10 billion institution, but when I say that, I don't say it with any great arrogance or great pride, because the need is so much more. You know, if you look at Africa's infrastructure needs, we have not even touched on 5% of it yet, right? So clearly there is huge opportunities for us, huge growth potential for us, and we need to do justice to it. From our side, the impact that we've had has been slow and steady. Over the 15 years of us operating, we have managed to invest across 34, 35 countries in Africa. We built projects that are transformational, like some of the bridges we have built has changed people's everyday commute time. Some of the ports and logistics we have built has removed the country's logistical obstacles and cost of goods produced. Some of the support we have given in the energy sector has meant that a country, for example, Djibouti, small country in the Horn of Africa, never had their own independent power production. But we discovered that there is wind there and we can build a power station. So that has had a huge impact on Djibouti, because suddenly from being a power importer, they are self-sufficient in power, and that too by using a natural resource. So I think the impact is manifold, but is it still significant? No, there's a lot more to be done. And that's why we need more institutions to work with us.
Thank you very much for answering Africa 24's English questions. Ladies and gents, please stay tuned to our programs.